Welcome to Amp Life, the #1 podcast for amputees, hosted by an amputee, and brought to you by De La Torre Orthotics and Prosthetics, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the Brian Moe, the social media advisor for De La Torre, and I also happen to be a below-knee amputee. Let's get into today's episode. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this episode of Amp Life. My guest today holds the Guinness record for being the first armless person in the world to ever have obtained a pilot's license and is the star of the documentary Right-Footed, Jessica Cox. Jessica, welcome to Amp Life.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be on.
Absolutely. So in the documentary Right-Footed, you share that your parents decide to raise you the same as your siblings and to not treat you any differently or to hide you away. And you say that they taught you to embrace your difference and embrace your disability. How did the decisions and the attitude of your parents empower you early on in your life?
Well, to be completely honest, early on, I didn't even see it as a disability.
Okay.
And it wasn't until, I guess, being labeled as a person with a disability that I realized, well, I guess this is something, because I thought of myself as just being a little different, but I never thought of it as a negative disability. And that was thanks to my parents, of course, and the community I grew up in. And they just always enforced this positive attitude, and my siblings didn't treat me any different. And for me, it was just my life. It wasn't a disability. It wasn't a handicap. It wasn't anything negative. I was different in a way. And my dad has said on a number of occasions that he's never once shed a tear about my birth condition. So he never saw me as a victim, and therefore I never had the opportunity to see that either. And that kind of positive mindset, my mom told me, you can do anything with God, you can do anything. And that helped me to develop into the person I am today. But of course, naturally, it was a journey to get there, and it wasn't something that happened overnight. And I was just fortunate for having the support around me.
Absolutely. That's an amazing attitude to have. You know, whether a person has a limb difference or they live with another physical or developmental difference, everyone desires to be viewed and to be valued as a person, as a human being. How did you learn to handle social acceptance, and what advice would you give to others who are struggling with the social acceptance in their own lives?
Well, the social acceptance was even more difficult than some of those physical challenges, surprisingly. Most people think, if you don't have arms, you've got a very difficult physical task of doing everything you need to do. But in reality, the social aspects are even more challenging, having to deal with going out into the public and deal with stares or questions or curiosity, which I learned, though they bothered me very early on. I learned that, I love this quote, it probably summarizes it very well. No one can make you feel inferior without your permission. Oh, and that's a quote I believe that's a quote by Eleanor Roosevelt. And her quote is so powerful and really helping me realize that no matter how people respond to you or react to you, whether it's positive or negative, it's definitely ultimately up to you as to how you take on that reaction. So understanding that I was ultimately in control of my own feelings of how people interacted with me socially has helped me embrace every opportunity I have when people react with a different response or with curiosity, or they see me in a restaurant eating with my feet and are drawn to looking at me and just looking at me for a while. And I realized that, this could be an opportunity for someone who's never seen someone like me before, or someone who's never seen someone with a disability, and, that this is just different for them. So I have to kind of understand from their perspective what it's like. And once I understand that, I would think the same thing. I'd be curious in the same way if I saw someone eating with something other than their hand, using a fork with their foot. I'm sure I would probably stare for just a little bit. So I think coming from a position of understanding helps me to deal with those different reactions I get from the public, and also to use them as opportunities.
Absolutely. One of the things, if I can just throw in here, you mentioned people's reaction when they see you eating with your feet. I didn't put this in the notes that I sent, but my wife told me I had to ask you this. She wants to know what the process is like from taking your shoes off to eating them. Do you wash your feet? What does that work like? That might sound silly, but I might get in trouble if I don't ask you that.
Yes, I always keep my feet clean. That's one thing about me is I keep my feet in shoes or sandals, but I'm keeping them clean, and I don't want barefoot places because I know I need to use my feet for doing things like eating in a restaurant. If for some reason my feet feel dirty or something for any reason, I will actually go into the bathroom of a restaurant and sit up on the counter so that I can elevate both feet and put them in the sink and wash them.
Okay.
So for me, it's just about constantly making sure my feet are regularly cleaned so that I can go to restaurants and not have to wash my feet, or I'll always carry a couple wipes in my bag if I absolutely need to clean them before using them.
Okay, thanks. Most of us, we don't like to talk about fear because it makes us confront things that we're uncomfortable with. And when I ask the average person what they're afraid of, they might tell me spiders or maybe mice, or some people want to look tough, so they'll claim they have no fears. You took your fear of flying to the next level. I was afraid of flying, so I got on last September. I flew for the first time, and it was fine, and it wasn't a big deal at all. But you became a pilot, and that just absolutely amazes me. Can you share with us your initial decision to fly a plane and the journey that was involved for you to become a pilot?
Well, I had never been up on a flight in a single engine airplane. Similar to you, I'd spent my whole childhood going up on small airplane flights. I mean, I've been on a number of commercial flights ever since as far back as I can remember, but I'd never been up on a small, in a small airplane. And this opportunity came about when I was addressing a group of Rotarians at the very beginning of my speaking career. That was 12 years ago. And when I spoke to this group of Rotarians, a fighter pilot, he came up to me and he asked, "How would you like to go up in a small airplane?" And I didn't initially jump at the opportunity. And my dad, because I kind of stood there kind of a little uninterested because of my fear. And then my dad, he basically jumped in and said she would love to. And so I went up on that flight for the first time, really terrified of being confined in this little space. And not only that, but it's mainly the fear of losing contact with the ground. And I just prayed a lot about it, and I gathered up my courage and I went up. And during that first flight, the pilot in command, who's the left seat of the airplane, similar to a car, he asked me, "How would you like to have your foot on the yoke of this airplane?" And in airplanes, you essentially have dual control. So you can fly the plane from the right side as well as the left. And I was sitting in the right seat, and I put my foot up on the yoke and was just hooked. And they have this saying in aviation, saying, you caught the bug. And it's the bug of flying. And that's something that I just really latched onto. And I said, I would love to be a pilot. And even if it means conquering this fear, which I still have a little of it when I take off in an airplane, losing contact with the ground. But I learned everything about flying and just the understanding of aerodynamics and how does an airplane fly. Just understanding that concept alone it has allowed me to lessen my fear of flying, coming from understanding the aerodynamics of how it's possible to be in flight.
Were there any challenges that were unique to your situation when it came for becoming a pilot and dealing with the FAA and the different requirements or anything like that?
That was actually one of the things we thought was going to be the toughest challenges it was going to be dealing with the Federal Aviation Administration. But surprisingly, the FAA, when the examiner, it's called the check ride examiner, the FAA representative who comes out to give you your check ride prior to your certification as a pilot. When he came out and I turned to him and asked him, "Have you ever given a pilot test to anyone without arms before?" And he said, "No." And he said, as far as he's concerned, if you can safely fly this airplane with your nose, then you can be a safe pilot. If you can safely fly this airplane and do everything I ask you and demonstrate that with your feet, then I see no reason why you should not be a certificated pilot as well. So surprisingly, he asked me everything that I needed to know. He had me demonstrate everything I needed to know. And once I was able to do that, I passed the check ride.
That's fantastic. Wow. So tell me about Right-Footed. When did the idea for the documentary begin?
Well, the idea of right-footed, the term right-footed is something that I've had for a very long time. I've actually used that as my website at the very beginning, 12 years ago, when I started the motivational speaking career. And everyone loved that right-footed. That right-footed is essentially saying I'm right foot dominant. And just like you would say right-handed or left-handed. And basically, sorry about that. When I decided to meet up with Nick, he's the director of the documentary, and he decided to ask me about using that term right-footed because I liked it so much. And he also saw the dual meaning behind right-footed, meaning helping people get on the right foot or go in the right direction. And I thought, well, that's wonderful. I love that too. And Nick Spark, who's a director of another award-winning, a number of other award-winning films, he came up to me and said, how would you like us to work on this documentary together? And I said, I'd be thrilled. It was just before my wedding. So I thought it'd be wonderful to have that as a piece of the documentary, to have that captured. And he decided to be a wonderful idea as well. And he pursued it. And it's been, 5 to 6 years since that first time I met him.
Oh, wow.
And it's been a journey to bring this to have a complete documentary. It just had its U.S. premiere 2 weeks ago. And so it's been a process.
Yeah. How did you get distributed to Fuse? I thought that was pretty cool. That it aired on Fuse television. I know the night it aired, my wife and I sat there and watched it, as did some other people, and we were amazed. But how did you get linked up with Fuse and all of that?
Well, Fuse is it's a pretty interesting network, and I didn't even know about Fuse until the director Nick came to me and he said, this is the network who's interested for domestic release here in the U.S. And I was, I looked them up and I thought it's a wonderful idea because they have this theme called We the Believers.
Right.
I'm sorry, We the Dreamers.
Right.
And it's essentially a number of documentaries about inspiring stories. And I had no idea that they were working on this whole We the Dreamers. And I thought, well, that'd be wonderful to be kind of clumped into with other documentaries that are inspiring and help challenge people to think differently. And so that was the start of it. Nick, the director, found a Fuse, and we decided to pursue it with them. And just 3 weeks ago, prior to the release, Patrick, my husband, and we went out to Manhattan, New York, and we went to their big building in New York City, and we filmed a couple of pieces before the release. And that was just pretty cool to go out there to New York City.
Yeah, they had, I noticed on Fuse's website, they had a couple of videos of you guys that were pretty cool, and it just kind of led into, building that anticipation for the documentary itself. So I thought that was really cool. So
yes, they did. They did a good job on that. Mm-hmm.
I shared on my Facebook that I'd be talking to you today, and I asked people to submit questions that they wanted to have you answer. And the number one question that came up was, how did you and Patrick take your relationship from Taekwondo to becoming husband and wife?
Well, Patrick and we met through Taekwondo, and I was an established black belt in the American Taekwondo Association. He was an established black belt. He was a 4th degree black belt. And I was, at the time, I believe I was a 1st degree black belt. Yeah, I was a 1st degree black belt. And I decided to pursue some additional training because I was given this invitation to speak on, or not to speak, but to do a demonstration at World Championships in front of what was potentially 5,000 people.
Oh, wow.
And it turned out to be even more than 5,000 people. It was amazing. And when I was invited to do that, I thought, okay, I'll go out and get some extra training to polish up my form and technique. And I went to a local school and there to meet up with a former friend and someone who I trained with back in college. And her name was Diana Perry. And I met with her, and she was co-instructing with Patrick Chamberlain, my now husband. And that's how I met, was the connection through a friend who ended up giving me some extra instruction. And I met him, and we met each other in something that we both had in common, our passion for Taekwondo. But if it hadn't been for Taekwondo, we would have never really ever met, because there was no other link between us.
Oh,
but
wow.
This passion for Taekwondo brought us together. And the thing I loved about Patrick was that it never even fazed him, the fact that I happen to be a little different. And for me, that type of comfort, that's very comforting to know how comfortable he is around me. And that type of comfort that he has, and he allows me to be myself, it was a friendship, and it ended up, he asked me out on a date. And then after that, I think it was like a year after dating, he proposed to me. And after a year of engagement, we got married. So it was a very fast process, I would say.
That's absolutely awesome. And I just have to add, watching the documentary, I absolutely love your cake topper. We're sitting there watching that, and when that scene came on and they showed the cake topper, I just looked at my wife. I said, "That is just stinking awesome." So props to you guys for that. I did. Every time okay, full disclosure, every time I go to a wedding reception, I always check out the cake and look at the cake topper and see if it meets like my seal of approval. So yours is by far the best I've ever seen anywhere.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, the company that made that, they were amazing, and they said, we want to be a part of your wedding day, and we're going to do this for you. And it was incredible. We were just so happy because it captured all of our hobbies and what we love to do. I think we're standing on, there's a surfboard on there. There's us in our Taekwondo uniform. And then there's even a scuba diving tank on this center, on the cake topper as well. So it captured all of our passions together there on one cake topper, which was pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's very impressive. Very cool. So I want to ask you about the work in Ethiopia with inclusive education for people with disabilities. I was left speechless when I read that only about 3% of Ethiopia's estimated 2.4 to 4.8 million children with disabilities get to go to school due to stigma and due to lack of accessibility, lack of trained teachers, and the adaptive learning resources. How did you get involved in that work? And since you have been involved, have you seen any improvements for inclusive education for these children?
Well, we were introduced to this statistic as well as the challenges in Ethiopia through Handicap International, and they're an NGO. They're headquartered out of France, but they actually have so many international offices. It's incredible. I don't even have the number here, but they introduced us to this. They asked about the possibility of me and Patrick going out to Ethiopia to speak to the press about disability. And not only that, but also to go and see some of their inclusive education efforts they've done throughout the country. And they have these, basically they're like student learning centers for people with disabilities, to help encourage inclusion of children with disabilities. So they have these centers that help, and they also had other efforts, like some of the teachers were teaching sign language. One of the schools we went to, everyone learned sign language, so that you didn't necessarily need a sign language interpreter for the one person or one or two couple students who happen to be hearing impaired, but instead had everyone in the class learn sign language. So now the students were rotating and taking turns signing for the student who was hearing impaired. It was pretty amazing to see that. But we went around the country to 2 different locations, 2 different cities, and we got to stop in and see some of the schools and visit with the teachers there that are part of the inclusive education effort, and really express to the press how important it is to include children with disabilities, and that disability does not mean inability. Just because someone happens to have a disability doesn't mean you have to leave them out of opportunities like going to school. And that was what we did while we were there. And now we ended up bringing that message to many of the senators here in the United States when it came to an international disability treaty called the Convention of Rights of People with Disabilities. And we brought that story of how much work Handicap International is doing to change the lives of people with disabilities in other countries, Ethiopia specifically with our trip there, and to share the importance of this international treaty to help encourage and be a role model to other countries around the world by signing on and ratifying the CRPD, so that we can encourage other people, letting them know that it's important. This is a very important thing, and it's an important treaty. And so that's what we ended up doing. And now we have checked in on occasion through the staff of Handicap International on the children in Ethiopia, and we're still working on the International Disability Treaty. It's not an appropriate time right now to pursue that any further, but once it does come back to the floor, we will definitely be back out there talking to senators, telling them how important this international treaty is, and sharing some of the stories of what we learned while we were in Ethiopia, which is a country that did ratify the CRPD.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, definitely important. I think, that a lot of people may be unaware. In America, I just think sometimes we're unaware of what goes on in other countries and what they don't have. So definitely appreciate the work you're doing in that and bringing awareness to us here in the United States. There was an event marking the 20th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and you had the opportunity to meet President Obama. What was that experience like for you, and how have you seen the ADA help you in your journey?
Well, I was invited in 2009 to attend the 20th anniversary Americans with Disabilities Act, and it was a phenomenal experience. It was pretty incredible to be invited to the White House. They first had to do a background check and all the normal routine for going to the White House, and then showing up at the White House, unknowingly, it was planned that there was a select group of people that were going to meet and have a photo op with President Obama. And I went to the White House not knowing I was on that list. So I was really excited when I was told when I arrived there, and we were all escorted into a specific room of the White House. We waited for a while and then escorted to another room where President Obama was, and we were able to meet with him for a couple seconds, and as well as do a photo op with him. And that was a pretty incredible thing to be a part of this 20th anniversary Americans with Disabilities Act. I didn't know how much of an impact it had on my life, because this was all when I was in first grade when the ADA went into effect.
Okay.
So I didn't know I do remember very vividly starting first grade, and they did things like change the doorknobs on the doors so that it was easier for me to get in and out from a round doorknob to a lever doorknob. They made me a specialized desk, which was something that I carried all the way through my school years, even through college. A desk that was essentially like a drafting table, so it's easier for me to write with my feet.
Okay.
And they did a couple modifications to a restroom in the school, so it was easier for me to use the restroom. So I obviously noticed and remembered all those things that happened, and it was all in response to this Americans with Disabilities Act, and it helps make my schooling and my education experience a lot easier. And if I did have anything I needed, I could advocate for those needs. And so it did have an effect on me.
As someone who shares a great faith in God, what was it like for you to have an audience with Pope Benedict XVI, and what gift did you give to him?
I have always been a woman of faith, and I'm just fortunate that my parents instilled that in me, and having that as a source of strength when everything else fails, having that faith in God and knowing that there's someone there and I'm not alone. And that for me is an incredible source of support. And it has been it's been that way my whole life. And so when I had the opportunity to meet with Pope Benedict, it was a wonderful way for me to express my gratitude, because a week or two prior, I was in Milan, Italy, receiving the Guinness World Record medal for being the first pilot to fly an airplane with just her feet. And after having that medal, 2 weeks later, going to Rome, and we happened to be in the middle of St. Peter's Square there for the papal blessing, which happens every Wednesday. The Pope comes out over all the people who've come and does a blessing. And while we were at that event, it wasn't planned, but I spoke with my brother and we decided that if we had the opportunity, I would love to give Pope Benedict my Guinness World Record medal.
Oh, wow.
But of course, there's thousands of people there. And yeah, it's unlikely unless you have an appointment 6 months prior to meet with him and have a private audience. It's unlikely you're going to be able to meet with him when you're competing with thousands and thousands of people. And there's all these barricades and security around. So we went up to one of the security guards and told him that I would like to share my Guinness World Record medal, give my Guinness World Record medal to the Pope. And he spoke with his higher up officials and security guards. And within 20, 25 minutes, less than half an hour, he came back with the top security guy, and the top security guy ushered us to the stage on the other side of the barricade. And we were on stage there for the papal blessing. And at the very end of that, the Pope meets with the select people who are there on stage with him. There are chairs around him. And my sister and I were the last 2 people that had the opportunity to meet him that day. Wow. And it was pretty incredible because I held up this Guinness World Record medal with my foot and I passed it to him saying I would like him to have this. And it was just a wonderful way for me to express my gratitude for everything I've been given in my life, is to share this medal with the Pope.
Absolutely incredible. Just amazing. One of the things I noticed when Patrick and I started exchanging emails, I noticed the phrase, think outside the shoe. Tell me about the importance of that phrase, what it means to you and the work that you do.
Think outside the shoe is everything to me because it's the way I approach any challenge that I've been given, whether it's a daily challenge of reaching into my cupboard and pulling something out and having to fix my own breakfast, or whether it's a big challenge like flying an airplane with my feet and having to first of all buckle myself into a 4-point harness. So think outside the shoe is just it's a mindset and a way of addressing a challenge. It's the same thing that most people refer to as think outside the box. But for me, it's think outside the shoe. And the reason why is because when I was a kid, I had to learn how to tie my shoes from the outside in, basically with both feet outside the shoe. I took the laces with both feet, made the bunny ear, tied the bow, and then slid my feet in. So that whole story of think outside the shoe goes back to that initial challenge as a kid learning to tie my shoes.
Wow, fantastic. So I know that you have a driver's license in the state of Arizona. Did you face any particular difficulties or challenges learning to drive a car?
I actually did not face challenges at the beginning because driving with my feet was just an automatic. I do everything with my feet, then I'm going to drive with my feet. And I had learned of other people older than me who had done the same thing. So I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to drive with my feet. A couple of them have modifications, a couple of them don't. And so when I went to learning how to drive, I was just having my right foot on the steering wheel, left foot over alternating between the accelerator and brake. And the reason why my right foot's on the steering wheel is because I'm right foot dominant. And so I would cross over my left foot to alternate between the accelerator and brake. And for me, that was just how I would drive an automatic vehicle. And I learned how to do that. Like I went to driver's ed in high school. I went and learned how to do that with the help of my dad. And then I went to take my test and I passed the test with flying colors. But then a woman saw me driving without special modifications and she felt it was unsafe. So she contacted the motor vehicle division and then they suspended my license and they told me I needed to get modifications. But after getting my modifications installed in my car, I went back in with a different test, a different examiner and did the same test. He saw I drove fine with the modifications and I asked him if I could take them off and he agreed. And so my car, I took all the modifications off and I showed him how I drive even better without them. So he reinstated my license without the need for special modifications.
Nice.
And so fortunately now I'm able to drive rental cars if I want to, which is what's great about it is I wanted the liberty of driving other cars And as far as my work as a speaker, traveling to other places, I need access to rental cars.
Absolutely. Tell me about your first book, Disarm Your Limits. How do you hope your book is going to inspire and encourage and even help others?
Well, the book Disarm Your Limits is a process that I have been meaning to write a book for a very long time. And finally I came out with this book. And it's not only just about my life. And that's the important thing about Disarm Your Limits. It's about applying these different principles to anyone. Principles like desire, persistence, and fearlessness. Those type of principles that have helped me in life, I also turn it around and ask the same question of the reader and ask them, what is it that holds them back? Are there times when they need to be more persistent? So for me, it's wonderful to be able to share my story, but it's even more important to be able to inspire the reader to think about their own lives and how they can apply these different principles to their own life, to their own challenges.
So, when I watch your story and I read your story, you've accomplished so many things in life. You 2 black belts, you earned a college degree, you're a pilot, certified scuba diver, a wife, a motivational speaker, and an author. And you inspire and you motivate so many people. So I had to ask, what motivates you and inspires you?
I love to have new challenges. It inspires me to have something that I have to figure out how I'm going to conquer it. And that inspires me to keep reaching for new adventures, new challenges, is the sense of adventure that comes with a new challenge, with a new obstacle. And that inspires me to just do new things. And with the method of thinking outside the shoe, I like to conquer those things to help other people realize too that, you can go out and do all these different adventurous things, and you just have to be positive and you have to be able to be persistent with it. And I think it's wonderful that there's so many things and so many freedoms we have in this country too, to be able to do so many wonderful things. And that what inspires me is the sense of adventure, of a new challenge, of a new obstacle. That inspires me. I also have had people in my life who've inspired me. I have a mentor who was born with both of her arms, but she lost her arms due to an electrical accident when she was 3. But she learned how to adapt using her feet in the same way I do. And she was older than me, and she mentored me at a time when I needed that inspiration as well. So she inspired me at a time that I needed it. And so people have inspired me, my own mentors and role models, and my parents, and the challenge of the adventure of taking on something new inspires me as well.
I talk to people daily who have some level of disability. Most of them are at some level of limb difference. And unfortunately, a lot of people allow themselves to get stuck with this woe is me mentality, and they become depressed, and they've convinced themselves that their lives are essentially over. What word of advice or encouragement would you give these people to help them understand that they're capable of having and living a rich and full life?
Well, there's so much that people can do, and there's so many opportunities out there that I think that taking on something new that is wonderful, that seems like it's a new challenge. I mean, it may seem a little intimidating at first, but there's something about taking on a challenge and conquering it, and that sense of achievement that comes with conquering something new, that helps anyone, and it helped me to boost my confidence, to really give me those endorphins of achievement. And that's what I think is what I would advise to anyone who feels negative or feels the negative mentality, is to really challenge yourself with something new that it helps stretch you to a new height, and you'll see how that achievement brings about confidence and positivity.
Absolutely. That's fantastic advice. I've been talking today with Jessica Cox, and for more information about Jessica, I would encourage you to visit her website, www.jessicacox.com. You can also connect with her on Facebook at JCMS Official and on Twitter at Jess_feet. Jessica, I thank you so much for joining me today on AMP Life. It has been absolutely awesome.
Well, thank you so much. Take care.
All right,
And
you too. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone. Okay, bye.
You've been listening to Amp Life, the #1 podcast for amputees, hosted by an amputee and brought to you by De La Torre Orthotics and Prosthetics, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you've enjoyed today's episode, leave us a review on iTunes or give us a like on Facebook. I'm the Brian Moe. I invite you to visit our website, www.amplifepodcast.com, or check us out on Facebook at Amp Life Podcast.